She adjusted his armor plates, but the Earthborn marking changed everything. The outpost on Varric 7 smelled like iron and something close to burning rubber. It always did. The air recyclers had been broken for 3 standard weeks, and nobody had come to fix them yet. The Coalition sent supplies. It sent weapons. It sent orders. But it never sent enough technicians. And the ones it did send never stayed long. Rena had been here for 14 months. She was a medic, assigned to Garrison Unit 9 under Commander Taeho, a broad-shouldered Korean man with tired eyes and a voice that never rose above a steady calm, no matter how bad things got. Taeho had served in 4 postings before Varric 7. He did not talk about any of them. Rena respected that. She did not talk much about her own life before the Coalition either. The garrison housed soldiers from 40 different species. That was not unusual for a Coalition outpost. What was unusual was that Varric 7 sat at the edge of map space, where the Coalition's reach thinned out like old cloth. Out here, resupply ships were slow. Communication delays were long. Decisions had to be made on the ground, by the people standing on it. Rena had learned that fast. Her job was to keep soldiers alive. All of them. Not just the humans. The Coalition did not allow medics to pick and choose based on species, which Rena thought was fair, though some of her colleagues had complained about it early on. Those complaints had faded after the first real engagement on Sector 3, when a Veilthari warrior named Doru had pulled 2 of those same colleagues out of a collapsed trench and carried them both at the same time, without slowing down. After that, nobody complained anymore. Doru was hard to miss. He stood nearly 7 feet tall, and his body was covered in natural armor plates, thick, interlocking pieces of dark gray material that grew directly from his skin. Veilthari plates were not decorative. They were functional, organic, and deeply personal. They shifted slightly when a Veilthari breathed or moved, and they hardened under stress. In battle, a Veilthari warrior in full plate tension could take impacts that would kill most other species outright. But Veilthari plates were also sacred. Rena had been told this during her species orientation training before the deployment. The instructor had been very clear. Do not touch a Veilthari's plates without explicit permission. Do not offer to adjust them. Do not even comment on them unless the Veilthari brings it up first. The plates were tied to Veilthari identity in a way that went beyond culture or tradition. Touching them without consent was treated, in Veilthari law, as something close to a physical violation. Rena had noted this. She had filed it away. She had moved on. She had not expected it to become relevant in the way it did. It was a quiet morning by Varric 7 standards, which meant no active fire and only 2 minor equipment failures before the second meal rotation. Rena was in the medical bay sorting supply crates when she heard the sound. It was not a crash exactly, more like a heavy thud, followed by silence, which on a garrison was somehow more alarming than noise. She stepped out into the corridor. Doru was on the ground. He was not unconscious, but he was close. His massive frame was slumped against the corridor wall, one hand pressed flat to the floor, the other gripping the wall panel beside him. His breathing was wrong, short and uneven. His gray plates were shifting in an odd, stuttering rhythm, and one section along his left chest, a larger plate that overlapped 2 smaller ones, had warped slightly out of position. Rena saw it immediately. She had studied Veilthari anatomy for exactly this reason. The plates could misalign under sustained stress or after certain kinds of impact. When the chest plates shifted wrong, they could compress the primary breathing channel. It was rare. It was also serious. A fully misaligned chest plate on a Veilthari could restrict airflow to critical levels within minutes. There were 3 other soldiers in the corridor, 2 Keth scouts, and 1 human infantryman named Bacon, a young soldier from Rena's own unit who was still new enough that he looked alarmed by everything. They were all standing still, watching Doru, not moving. Nobody moved toward Avelthari's plates. Rena understood why. She understood the rule. She also understood that Doru's breathing was getting shorter, and that the plate was pressing inward at an angle that was not going to correct itself, and that she had maybe 2 minutes before this stopped being an adjustment problem and became something much worse. She crossed the corridor. She did not announce herself. There was no time for ceremony. She placed both hands on Doru's chest plate, the large one that had shifted, and she pulled. The plate was dense and hot under her palms. It did not want to move. Avelthari plates resisted external pressure as part of their natural defense function. Rena had read that too. She pulled harder, repositioning her grip, angling her hands the way she had seen in the anatomy diagrams. Her fingers found the edge of the warped section, and she pressed down and outward at the same time, leaning her full body weight into it. It moved. It took 3 hard pushes, and a moment where she was almost certain she had made it worse, before the plate slid back into its correct position, with a sound like something locking into place. The stuttering rhythm of Doru's breathing changed. It deepened, steadied. After several seconds it became regular again. Doru's hand dropped from the wall. The corridor was completely silent. Rena straightened up, checked her hands out of habit, and looked at Doru. He was staring at her. His eyes were large and amber-colored, and the expression in them was one she had never seen on a Avelthari face before, mostly because she had never spent much time studying Avelthari expressions. She did not know exactly what it meant, but it was not anger. She was fairly certain it was not anger. She took a step back. "You need to come to the medical bay," she said. "I want to check the other plates while we still have time." Doru said nothing. Behind her, Bacon made a small sound that might have been a word, and might have just been breath. The 2 Ket scouts had not moved at all. The corridor still smelled like iron and burning rubber, and the air recyclers were still broken, and somewhere down the hall a door was banging against its frame, because the seal had been failing for a week. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 10 minutes ago, except that Rena had touched Avelthari's armor plates, without permission, in front of witnesses, and the Avelthari in question was now breathing steadily, looking at her with those amber eyes, and making no move to stand, as if he was still deciding what had just happened, and what it meant. Rena waited. "Medical bay," she said again, quieter this time. "Come on." She adjusted his armor plates, but the Earthborn marking changed everything. Word traveled fast in a garrison. It did not matter how large the outpost was, or how many species were packed into it. Something happened, and within hours, everyone knew. Not always accurately, not always in the right order, but they knew something. By the evening meal rotation, every soldier in Garrison Unit 9 had heard a version of what Rena had done in the corridor. Some of the versions were close to accurate. Others had grown in ways that made Rena tired just listening to them. Bacon, who had been there and seen the whole thing, kept telling people that it had been amazing, which Rena did not think was a useful description of a medical intervention. She told him to stop. He nodded. Then he told the next person it had been incredible instead, which was not better. The Keth scouts did not say anything publicly. Keth rarely did. They communicated mostly within their own units, and what they passed to each other stayed there. But Rena noticed them watching her the next morning during the equipment check. Not with hostility, with something quieter than that. Commander Tejo called her into his office that afternoon. It was a small room. Most things on Varac 7 were small. There was a desk, 2 chairs, a wall screen that flickered at one corner, and a single narrow window that showed a stretch of flat pale ground and the dark line of the horizon. Tejo was sitting behind the desk when she came in. He gestured to the chair across from him. She sat. He looked at her for a moment without speaking, which was a thing he did. Rena had learned not to fill that silence. People who tried to fill Taeho's silences usually ended up saying things they had not planned to say. "Tell me what happened," he said. She told him, plainly, in order, without adding anything that had not been there. The misaligned plate, the breathing pattern, the 2-minute estimate, the decision, the result. She did not frame it as brave or reckless or anything else. It was a medical situation, and she had responded to it. Taeho listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet again for a moment. Then he said, "You know what the regulations say about Veilthari anatomy and physical contact." "Yes," she said. "And you did it anyway." "Yes." Because he was going to stop breathing. Taeho looked at her. His expression did not change much, but something in it settled. He nodded once, slowly, and picked up the data tablet on his desk. "I have to file a report," he said. "Coalition protocol requires a formal record any time cross-species physical contact occurs without prior consent, especially with Veilthari. You understand that?" "I understand." "The report will note the medical necessity. It will also note that the contact was uninvited." He paused. "Doru has already submitted his own account. He did not file a complaint." Rena had not expected that, though she thought perhaps she should have. She said nothing. He described the incident as, Taeho looked down at the tablet, "a correction applied with appropriate force and correct knowledge." He set the tablet down. "That is, for the record, the closest thing to a formal endorsement a Veilthari warrior can give to a non-Veilthari's handling of their plates." The room was quiet. Outside the narrow window, the pale ground of Varrock 7 stretched out flat and empty. The sky was a low grayish color, neither day nor night. It was always somewhere between the two out here. "Is there anything else?" Rena asked. "No," Taeho said. "Dismissed." At the door, he spoke again without looking up from the tablet. "Rena." She stopped. "Next time, if there is a next time, and on this posting there usually is, still do the right thing." He turned a page on the tablet. "Just try to do it slightly less publicly." She almost smiled. She did not, but it was close. What nobody talked about in the official accounts, not Bacon's breathless retelling, not the Keth Scout's silent observations, not Taeho's careful report, was the detail that Doru had quietly mentioned to 3 of his own unit members later that night. He had told them, in the low and measured way that Veilthari communicated serious things, that when the human medic had gripped his chestplate and pulled, the force had been wrong. Not wrong in a bad sense. Wrong in a factual one. Human hands, by every recorded measurement and every physical study the Coalition had ever conducted on the species, should not have been able to apply that kind of pressure to a misaligned Veilthari plate. The plates resisted external force as a biological function. They were not impossible to move. Other Veilthari could adjust them, or specialized Coalition medical equipment could manage it with the right settings. But bare human hands? The grip strength was not there. The leverage was not sufficient. The biology did not support it. And yet the plate had moved. Doru's unit members had listened to this in silence. Then one of them, an older warrior named Kiv, who had been fighting in Coalition forces for longer than most soldiers in the garrison had been alive, had asked a short question in their own language. Doru had answered it. Kiv had not spoken again for the rest of the night. Rena knew none of this. She was in the medical bay, finishing her supply inventory from that morning and updating patient logs. The recyclers were still making their low grinding sound in the background. Someone down the hall was playing music softly, something with a steady beat that she could feel more than hear. The garrison was settling into its nighttime rhythm, quieter but never fully quiet, because outposts like this one never fully slept. She finished her last entry, stretched her hands out on the desk in front of her, and looked at them the way a person looks at their own hands when they have been doing something physical and want to make sure everything still feels normal. Her hands looked normal. She closed the log, turned off the desk light, and went to sleep. She did not notice, in the dim light of the bunk room, the faint and very soft glow that had begun to trace itself in thin lines just below the skin of her left forearm. It was barely visible, like light seen through thick paper. It pulsed once, very gently, and then went still. She slept through it entirely. Outside, on the flat, pale ground of Verac 7, the sky sat between night and day, the same way it always did, and the garrison hummed and clicked and breathed around her, full of 40 species, going about the business of surviving at the edge of everything known. Nobody noticed the glow. Not yet. She adjusted his armor plates, but the Earthborn marking changed everything. Rena found out about the mark the way most people found out about things on Verac 7, because someone else saw it first. It was Bacon. He was eating breakfast across the table from her when he stopped mid-sentence and stared at her left arm. His mouth stayed open, in the shape of the word he had been about to say, but never finished. The spoon in his hand hovered over his food without moving. "What?" Rena said. It was not really a question. It was more of a warning. Bacon pointed at her forearm. She looked down. The lines were faint, but clear in the morning light. They traced a pattern across her skin, branching and looping in a way that did not look like any injury she had ever seen, and did not look like any mark she had ever made on herself. They were thin, almost delicate, but they had depth to them, like something that had grown there, rather than been placed on top. They were not quite the color of her skin, and not quite a different color either. When the light hit them at the right angle, they caught it in a way that ordinary skin did not. She tilted her arm. The lines shifted slightly in the light. Not glowing, not exactly, but close. "When did that happen?" Bacon asked. "I don't know," she said. She was telling the truth. She turned her arm over and back, looking at the pattern from different angles. It did not hurt, it did not itch, it did not feel like anything. It was simply there, on the inside of her left forearm, from the wrist to just below the elbow, a set of fine branching lines that she had not had yesterday. She pulled her sleeve down and finished her breakfast. Bacon did not say another word for the entire meal, which was, Rena reflected, possibly the longest stretch of silence she had ever gotten from him. She went to Tejo before she went to the medical bay. She pushed her sleeve up and showed him without explaining first. He looked at it for a long time. His face did the careful, controlled thing it usually did, but she could see him working through something behind it. He asked her when she had first noticed it. She told him what she knew, which was almost nothing. He asked if it hurt. She said no. He asked if she had been exposed to anything unusual in the past day, chemicals, radiation, biological contact outside standard parameters. The heat of it under her palms, the resistance, and then the give. "Not that I know of," she said. Tejo looked at the mark for another moment. Then he told her to go to the medical bay and run a full self-scan, document everything, and flag the results to him before sending them anywhere else. His voice was steady. His eyes were not. She noticed, but did not comment on it. The self-scan found nothing wrong. Her biology was exactly what it should be. No chemical exposure, no radiation markers, no abnormal cellular activity. Whatever the lines were, they had not come from an outside source acting on her body. The scanner treated them the same way it treated freckles or old scars, as features, not problems. She documented everything, flagged it to Tejo, and sat in the medical bay for a while, thinking. The information traveled faster this time. She was not sure how. She had not told anyone except Tejo. But by midday, something had shifted in the way the garrison moved around her. Not dramatic, not obvious. Small things. A Keth scout who usually walked past her without acknowledgement stopped and looked at her arm. Her sleeve was down. Nothing was visible. And then walked on, without a word. Two Vilethari soldiers from Doru's unit stopped their conversation when she passed, and did not start it again until she was gone. A Coalition intelligence officer she had never spoken to sent her a short message asking if she would be available for a meeting at her convenience, which was not how intelligence officers usually worded their requests. Doru found her in the equipment corridor that afternoon. He was moving carefully, which was unusual. Vilethari did not usually move carefully. They moved with the kind of settled, heavy confidence that came from being the largest and most armored thing in any given space. But he slowed when he reached her, and he stood at a distance that felt deliberate, and he looked at her left arm, the way someone looks at something they have been thinking about. "May I?" he said. His standard was precise but accented, each word given the same careful weight. "See it." Rena looked at him for a moment. Then she pushed her sleeve up. He did not lean in. He did not reach out. He looked at the mark from where he stood, his amber eyes moving over the lines slowly, tracing the pattern. His expression was doing something she still could not fully read. After a long time, he exhaled. It was a deep sound, not quite a sigh, more like something being set down. "You know what it is," she said, not a question. He was quiet for a moment. "My people know of it," he said. "We were told it was a legend." "What kind of legend?" "The kind," he said slowly, "that other species use to explain things they cannot explain another way." Rena waited. "There is an old name for it," he said. "In my language, it does not translate cleanly. But in Standard, the closest words are, 'the brand of the unbroken.'" He paused. "It is said to appear on a being who has done something that should not have been possible. Not difficult, not dangerous, impossible. By every law of physics and biology and known fact, impossible." He looked at her arm again. And yet, it happened anyway. The corridor was quiet. The recyclers hummed somewhere above them. "The plate," Rena said. He nodded once. "I have said already that your hands should not have been able to move it. I did not say it for conversation. It is a fact. I have felt what you did, and I know what human hands can do, and they cannot do that." He paused. "And yet you did." The lines were still faint, still quiet, still there. "What does it mean?" she asked. "The brand. What does it actually mean, beyond the name?" Doru considered the question seriously, the way she had noticed Vilethari always considered things they thought deserved real answers. "It means," he said, "that something has noticed you." She adjusted his armor plates, but the Earthborn marking changed everything. The message from Coalition High Command arrived 41 hours after Tejo filed his flagged report. He had sent it up the chain the way protocol required, with all the documentation attached. Rena's self-scan results, the scanner's classification of the mark as a biological feature, the photographic record, and his own written account of what had happened in the corridor. He had been careful and precise. He had not overstated anything. He had simply put the facts in order and sent them up. The response time of 41 hours was, for Coalition High Command, extraordinary. Tejo had sent reports to High Command before. The usual response time was between 4 and 11 standard days, and sometimes longer. 41 hours meant that someone at the top had seen the report quickly and had not put it in a queue. It requested that Garrison Unit 9 prepare for the arrival of a Coalition Elder Council envoy. It gave an estimated arrival window. It offered no explanation. Tejo read the message 3 times, then called Rena into his office again. She sat across from him the same way she had 2 days before. He showed her the message. She read it, set the tablet down, and looked out the narrow window at the flat pale ground of Verac 7. "Elder Council," she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment. The Elder Council was not a group that traveled to outposts. They operated from the deep interior of Coalition space, from stations so old that some of them had been built before humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel. They sent representatives to major treaty negotiations and species admission hearings, and occasionally to sites of what the Coalition formally classified as anomalous events of historical significance. "That fast," she said. "That fast," Tahoe agreed. She looked at her left arm, sleeve covering the mark. "They know what it is." He said nothing, because they both already knew the answer was yes. The envoy arrived inside the estimated window, which was itself unusual. Coalition travel schedules were more suggestions than guarantees at the edge of mapped space. The fact that the envoy's ship came in early, running what had to be close to maximum transit speed, said something about the priority that had been assigned to this visit. There were 3 of them, an elder of the Veil species, ancient and careful moving, with the layered skin patterns that marked extreme age among its kind. A Coalition historian whose species Rena did not recognize, tall, pale-skinned, with large dark eyes that moved constantly, cataloging everything. And a human, which surprised her. A woman, older than Tahoe, with gray-streaked hair pulled back, and a uniform that carried enough rank indicators that Bacon actually straightened up when she walked past, which he had never done for anyone before. Her name, she said, was Elder Senna. She said it plainly, as an introduction, not as an announcement. Rena appreciated that. The meeting was held in the garrison's largest briefing room, which was not very large. Tahoe was present, along with Rena and Doru, whom the envoy had specifically requested by name. The Veilthari elder's presence, Rena noted, seemed to affect the Veil elder and the historian in a way that was hard to define. Something more like attention. The way people pay attention when they know they are in the room with a primary source. Elder Senna sat across from Rena. She looked at the mark for a long time without speaking. The historian was recording everything. The Veil elder was completely still. Then Senna spoke. "The last confirmed appearance of the Earthborn mark," she said, "was 6,214 standard years ago." She paused. "The being who carried it at that time was a member of a species that no longer exists. What we know about what it did comes from the records of 4 other species who witnessed the events of that period. The records do not agree on every detail, but they agree on the outcome." "What was the outcome?" Rena asked. "The Davin War ended." Senna looked at her steadily. It had been ongoing for approximately 90 standard years at that point. It had consumed 11 inhabited systems and caused extinction-level damage to 3 species. Projections at the time indicated it would continue for another 40 to 60 years, and result in the complete destruction of at least 2 more species. She paused again. It ended in 11 days. The briefing room was very quiet. "What did the being do?" Rena asked. "Nobody fully agrees," Senna said. "That is part of why the records conflict. What is consistent across all accounts is that the being carrying the mark went to the center of the conflict. Alone, without an army, without weapons in any conventional sense, and did something that made both sides stop." She folded her hands on the table. The war did not merely pause. It ended, completely, permanently. The conditions that had caused it were not addressed by negotiation or force. They were simply resolved, in ways that the historical records describe but cannot explain. Rena looked at her own arm. The sleeve was still down. "I'm a medic," she said. "Yes," Senna said. "I fixed a misaligned armor plate." "Yes. I'm not that." She gestured vaguely at the space where Senna's story had just been. "I'm not someone who ends wars." Senna was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, "The being 6,000 years ago was a farmer. Before the mark appeared, it had no military training, no political position, no particular standing among its own people." She looked at Rena. The mark does not choose people because of what they have already done. That is not how it has ever worked, according to any record we have. Doru, who had been sitting still through all of this, spoke for the first time. It chooses, he said, because of what they are. Everyone looked at him. He did not elaborate. They said what they meant, and considered the rest to be the listener's work. Commander Tejo had been silent for most of the meeting. Now he leaned forward slightly. "What do you need from us?" he asked Senna. Practical, direct, Tejo's version of any conversation. Senna looked at him. "We need to understand the mark," she said. "We need to study it, document it, and determine as best we can what it signifies in terms of the current situation." She paused. "And we need to know if it has done anything yet, beyond appearing." Tejo looked at Rena. Rena thought about Doru's plate moving under her hands, the heat and resistance of it, the way it had given way not because she had been strong enough to force it, but because, and this was the thought she had been not quite having for 2 days, it had felt, in some way she had no scientific language for, like it had decided to. "I don't think." But even as she said it, she was not entirely sure it was true. She adjusted his armor plates, but the Earthborn marking changed everything. 3 days after the envoy arrived, the briefing room had become a permanent meeting space for people Rena had never met, discussing things she had not asked to be part of. She knew this because she could hear them through the wall. The garrison's construction was practical rather than soundproof, and the briefing room shared a wall with the small storage corridor, where Rena sometimes sat on a supply crate when she needed 5 minutes away from other people. She was sitting there now, eating instant noodles from a container that was slightly too hot to hold comfortably, but not hot enough to wait for. The voices on the other side of the wall were low and overlapping, switching between at least 3 languages, occasionally rising into something that sounded like disagreement. She could pick out individual words sometimes. Her name, standard terms for the mark, a phrase in Veilthari that Doru had once told her, translated roughly as weight of consequence. She ate her noodles. The past 3 days had been strange in a specific and exhausting way. The envoy conducted sessions with her every morning, careful and structured, asking questions that were always polite and occasionally profound, and sometimes both at the same time. Elder Sena was thorough. She never pushed. She never made Rena feel like a subject being studied, though that was, technically, what was happening. The Veil Elder observed, and the historian recorded, and Sena asked questions, and Rena answered them as honestly as she could, which meant that most of her answers were some version of, "I don't know, and I didn't plan it, and it just seemed like the right thing to do." She had also been asked, twice, to attempt something deliberate with the mark. Both times, she had sat in the briefing room, with her sleeve pushed up, and the historian's recording equipment running, and she had thought very hard about doing something with the faint lines on her forearm, and nothing had happened at all. The lines stayed exactly the same. They did not glow brighter. They did not move. The second time she had tried so hard that she had given herself a mild headache, and the session had ended with Sena politely suggesting she rest. She was not a weapon. She was not a tool. She was a medic sitting in a storage corridor, eating noodles, while 3 alien dignitaries argued about her through the wall. The door to the corridor opened. Doru stepped in. He had to angle his shoulders slightly to fit through the frame. He looked at her, then at the supply crate next to her, then back at her. She moved her jacket off the second crate. He sat down on it with the careful, precise way he did everything since his chest plates had been adjusted. Not more fragile, just more deliberate, like he was paying attention to his own body in a different way than before. They sat in silence for a while. The voices through the wall continued. "They've been in there all day," Rena said. "Yes," Doru said. "Do you know what they're discussing?" "Some of it." He paused. There is a situation beyond this outpost. The Elder Council did not travel this far only because of the mark. She looked at him. He was quiet for a moment, choosing his words with the deliberateness that she had come to recognize as Doru thinking something through, rather than avoiding it. There is a faction, he said, at the edge of a system called Varathi. They have been building towards something for several years. The Coalition has been watching. They are not watching anymore. They are preparing. The faction knows the Coalition is preparing. They are calculating whether to act before the Coalition acts first. This calculation has been ongoing for some months. And the arrival of an Elder Council envoy at an edge outpost, he said, is the kind of event that gets noticed, even by factions in Varathi. He looked at her. They are now calculating whether the mark is relevant to their decision. Rena set down her noodle container. They think the mark changes something. They think it might, which, he said, is almost the same thing. She looked at her left forearm. Through the sleeve she couldn't see anything, but she knew the lines were there. They had not changed since they appeared. They had not spread, not faded, not done anything except exist quietly on her skin and cause an extraordinary amount of disruption to everyone around her. I'm not what they think I am, she said. Doru looked at her for a long time with those amber eyes. 6,000 years ago, he said slowly, a farmer said something very similar. He paused. According to the records. She picked up her noodles again. They had gotten cold. She ate them anyway. The door to the storage corridor opened a second time, and Tejo was there, looking at both of them with the expression he wore when he had already decided something and was working out the best way to deliver it. Rena, he said, they want you back in the briefing room. I just left the briefing room. I know, they have a new question. She sighed through her nose, capped her noodle container, and stood up. Doru stood at the same time, all 7 feet of him unfolding from the small crate with a solemnity that made the gesture feel significant. She looked up at him. You don't have to come, she said. I know, he said. And then he turned and walked toward the briefing room ahead of her, clearing the path in the way that only Veil Thari could, simply by existing in a corridor. She followed. In the briefing room, the Veil Elder, Elder Sena, and the historian were gathered around the main table. 3 other figures had joined them via screen, remote attendees, their faces rendered slightly uneven by the outpost's limited signal quality. One of them she did not recognize. One was a Coalition military official whose rank markers were so numerous they had started to overlap. And one was a figure in plain clothing with no visible rank or species indicator at all, which in Coalition politics usually meant they were very important or very dangerous, or both. They all looked at her when she came in. Doru took a position near the wall, not at the table. He had not been asked to sit. He stood the way Velthari soldiers stood when they were not fighting, still, present, watching. Elder Sena spoke first. We have been discussing the Varathi situation, she said, and we have been discussing the mark, and we have reached a question that we cannot answer among ourselves. She paused. We want to ask it to you. All right, Rena said. If asked, Sena said carefully, would you go? The room was very quiet. The signal from the remote screens hummed softly. Rena sat down. She looked at the table for a moment. She thought about the corridor, and Doru on the ground, and the heat of the plate under her hands, and the way it had felt when it moved. Not like she had forced it, but like something had agreed to happen. She thought about the farmer 6,000 years ago. She thought about 11 days, and a war that stopped. She was a medic. She had no army, and no weapons, and no political standing, and no particular plan. She also had, on her left forearm, a mark that had appeared for the first time in 6,000 years. And she had not asked for it, and she did not fully understand it, and she was not sure she believed in any of the things the histories said about it. But Doru was breathing. That was a fact. She had done that, and it was real. And it had happened because she had not stood still when standing still was the obvious option. She looked up at Elder Senna. "Ask me properly," she said. "Not like a question, like an actual ask. Tell me what you need, and where, and why." Senna looked at her. Something in the elder's face shifted. Not surprise exactly, more like recognition. "We need someone to go to Varathi," she said. "Not as a soldier, not as a diplomat. We don't know what as. We only know that the mark has appeared once before, at a moment when everything was about to go in the worst direction, and it changed the direction." She paused. "We don't know how. We don't know why. We don't know if it will happen again. We are asking you because we have no better answer." Across the galaxy in a system called Varathi, a faction ran its calculations. The numbers shifted with every new piece of information. The arrival of the mark, real, confirmed, documented, was a variable none of their models had accounted for, because none of their models had included a scenario where it was real.